David, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. You're actually someone that I've been very excited to talk about because there's so many things, nasal breathing, that have happened in my life in the last year and a half. And you're the first, expert really in the space that I'm able to talk to. And you have a crazy athletic background. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to be here.
No, my pleasure. I'm sure that is exactly how you sort of soften up all of the guests, but I appreciate the sentiments anyway. Yeah.
Yep. Just a couple of jabs right in the beginning. But yeah, so we had talked briefly about this. I thought it would kind of be fun to do. If you could just kind of take us through a very quick introduction into nasal breathing, using maybe some of the practices that you use yourself or you use with your clients or teams, athletes, stuff like that. And this is directed intentionally to you, the listener, to challenge yourself to actually try this while we go through this and see what you notice.
Okay. You gave me about 3.5 seconds warning of what this would be, but I've got a little idea. So what we're going to do is 2 very simple things for you to feel a couple of bits of your body doing the jobs they're supposed to do in terms of respective breathing. And they're then 2 little tools that you can use for any breathing protocol exercise or just for life breathing better. So I think that would be in the 3.5 seconds I had to figure it out. I thought, let's go for that. Okay. Luckily, I don't know, you said expert. I just consider myself like I'm a master instructor with the Oxford advantage, but I'm just a guy like everyone else, and I've had my own breathing problems, which we can talk about from injuries from a rugby career. But it's just a pleasure to be able to have learned something and gone whoa, this is crazy. I just can't not share this, just be the nature of being a coach. But anyway, Absolutely. So these couple of exercises then, 2 really important things for our breathing: how we get air in and where you're getting it in from. So meaning, am I getting, is the thing that's driving it in, is the driver, is the mover. As you sit there and breathe now, what we need to do is just sit and breathe, take a couple of breaths and notice 2 things. Where's the air coming in and out? You've got some holes in your face. It's got to come in through one of those. Yeah. Yep. So it's probably either coming in and out of your nose or your mouth, or a mixture of the 2. Yeah. And then what's causing it to come in, as in within your body? And a lot of people at the start, you'll be like, well, I don't know. But it's okay, well, just sit still for a second and just quieten your mind and the world. Yeah. If you close your eyes, it might help you be able to go a little bit more internal. But I'm a big fan of not doing stuff with your eyes closed, because life happens with your eyes open. But to start with, if it helps you to feel, then do that. But just notice what within your body is moving. For air to come in and out, stuff must be moving. Something must be moving. Your ribs or something has got to move to change the volume inside of you in order to change pressure so the air comes in and out. Now, what we want to be doing that, or I like to think of letting things do the job they're designed to do. So your diaphragm is your number 1 breathing muscle. He does a great job, or she does a great job, in stabilizing our pelvis as well. And there's some really interesting stuff around diaphragmatic breathing and functional movement and that stuff. But in terms of breathing, that's his job. So let's let him do his job. Like it's, if you're you've got a job and someone tries to muscle in on you, you sort of why are you trying to do my thing? Let's tee the diaphragm to do his job or her job. And then the other thing is the nose. Your nose is designed for breathing. 30 different functions of the nose that the mouth does not have, that shows it's designed for breathing. And within that design, there is an efficiency to our breathing, a calmness to our breathing on our mentally, and also physiologically in terms of the nervous system. So let's gear ourselves up to breathe how we were designed to, which is just better for the body. And if you think about breathing, or if you don't think about breathing, but now let's think about breathing. If you don't breathe, you die. And everyone goes, yeah, of course. It's like, okay. So how come we don't prioritize the most important thing? What else do you need to live? And we go, well, we need food and water. And I go, no, wrong. And people, it's like, well, hold on a minute. No? And because it's a bit unfair. It's a bit it's a bit too black and white with it. But essentially the point I try to make for people is, if I put food in front of you, but you have no air. I take or suck all the air out of you, you're dead. So having the food and water makes no difference. The
Like
food and
maybe it's
water allow you to live for longer.
an adjustment in the hierarchy of which one of those precedes the other.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so if it is the most important thing of your base level, so I'm not saying it's complicated, but if it is the most important thing that your body needs potentially, and is an absolute just base level to being alive, before you try and do anything else complicated, before you try and record a podcast, before you try and say some fancy words to try and make yourself clever, Jacko, or sound clever so people will listen to you. So before you try and do any of that stuff, you've got to be alive. And to be alive, you've got to have air coming in and out. Now, you can have your body do it on autopilot that may be dysfunctional or even just not optimized or a little bit inefficient, and ask your body to do a bit more work than it needs to for just staying alive. And that's where I come in at and try and go, well, regardless of how someone's breathing, if they're breathing really poorly, like it's really important that we change. If you're breathing really well, that's great, but you could still breathe. You could still be a bit more efficient. And if we're more efficient with that base level of being alive, it lets your body have and challenges and things in life that are hard that you want to add on top of that. So we were going to do 2 exercises. Let's do the exercises.
Yeah. And one thing, I'll jump in real quick because this
Yeah.
is something that I saw you talk about I think it was in a presentation, and it clicked with me so well because I've focused on diaphragmatic breathing with clients for years and done things from, lying on the ground, applying pressure to the side of their abdomen or their back and trying to get them to breathe into the space. But one thing that David illustrated really well is this idea of creating proprioception on yourself, which you do by scratching. And I watched the video, and like I said, I focus on nasal breathing all the time. I focus on diaphragmatic breathing in my training and everything I do. And even for me, this was kind of like an eye opener. And so you had people actually scratch. I'm physically doing this now, but scratch your abdomen, scratch the side of yourself with your nails, because it creates this identifying sensation on that spot of the body. And then when you breathe, you're talking about kind of where does this come from? What part of the body is doing its job? By doing that scratching beforehand, it gives you a target to mentally pay attention to, because what I imagine, and many people listening who just tried that probably won't notice this, their shoulders were breathing, right? It's up and down here because most of us naturally do that without having some intention behind where we're drawing that from. So how else do you think people listening can create this diaphragmatic sensation as they're trying to do this exercise?
It's like we planned it, buddy. It is like we planned this. People will think these two must have been on the call pre-recorded, right, planning this thing out. So we've got all that's to do with. I mean, I came across this with Dr. Cobb from Z Health Performance. We're talking about like the sensory receptors that you have in your skin before moving any body part. They would advocate, like, if I'm going to do like a load of like elbow flexion work from, I don't know, bicep curls, whatever I'm doing, it would be rub and stimulate the skin around that body part. Yep. I was like, I just took went, well, if I want my ribs to move better, just by sending some sensory input by rubbing is going to help the brain map where that is. Because interestingly, different parts of your body are better connected to your brain, and you have better proprioception of. And unfortunately, this mid-trunk area, we have poor proprioception of typically, like everyone just does. So if people just do that now, if you find your lower ribs where your diaphragm is on those lower ribs, and you rub those lower ribs and you rub around the back of there, you'll start to wake that up and that's just from the outside. Then the thing we're going to then do is, the exercise I'm going to give you is, what about then we'll look at from the inside. So I'm rubbing that area all around from below my sternum, those lower ribs, all the way around to the back, because your rib cage goes and your lungs go all the way around the back. It's 3-dimensional. Yeah, we're not these 2-dimensional beings. And then if you just feel where you were rubbing and notice as you breathe in, you're trying to think about that area expanding. And then whatever sensations or feelings you're feeling or noticing, the question is like, are you using your diaphragm? Is my diaphragm contracting on my inhale? And the question I had when someone talked about diaphragmatic breathing, I was like, introduce this. I was like, well, I don't know. How do I know if I'm feeling it? I don't know. I can feel my stomach or my abs, but I know that's not my diaphragm. So, just understanding drawing air in
the diaphragm is like this dome shape, which gets more complicated. There's two hemispheres and one's bigger than the other and all that. But as a simplified version, it's this dome shape going along at the front, the line of your lower ribs. If you feel with your hands, those lower ribs, like they're at an angle. And as you breathe in, the diaphragm, when it contracts, because of the shape of it, as it contracts, it pulls down, which is drawing air in like a syringe pulling down, but it also flattens out and helps to push the ribs out. But your ribs are also trying to move out as well to facilitate that movement of the diaphragm, as I understand it. And that is a contraction. The diaphragmatic muscle is contracted. So when you flex your elbow, your bicep is contracting. It's a muscle contraction, the same as that. How do you try, say if you're working with a physio and you've got injured and we need to like work on like activating before strengthening, how do you feel? What's the first stage in like getting a muscle recruited? Typically isometrics. How do we make the diaphragm isometrically contract? Well, if we breathe in, it's already shortened, like flexing the bicep. And then if you squeeze it again at that point, try and squeeze it as hard as you can. Once it's shortened, once it's contracted, you feel the strongest contraction. So what we do with this is that area you are rubbing, you breathe in through the nose and try and feel that area expand. Then you pinch your nose and hold your breath and try to then breathe in again. And what you'll feel is internally this movement being pushing out from the inside.
Whoa.
There you go. Is that the first? That's obviously the first area. Now, some people, they will still go, because they're not well connected to it. When they try to breathe in, they'll have the habit of lifting the ribcage vertically, and they actually won't feel that diaphragm. And that's, if you can't, it's just a little bit of practice. You just got to think of that area you're rubbing on the outside, try to connect to that. And then the breath, holding the breath and breathing in is trying from the inside to feel that diaphragm pushing out on that area. And you go, oh, that's my diaphragm contraction, right? Okay, that's what it feels like. And it's like, that feels a bit weird. Like it's deep inside. It's sort of, it's around my abs, but it's not my abs. It's deep. And you go, okay, now when I'm breathing, it's not going to feel as strong as that because you're just going to let air come in and out. But can you feel this movement on the inside of you, pulling down, pushing and flattening out, and that area you're rubbing around those lower ribs expanding out in all directions?
It's so crazy
one
because
exercise.
this is
so simple. It is simple. It is.
It's such a, I mean, there's obviously so many different angles and so many benefits to this kind of stuff, but with both of us from our strength training background, I mean, no world record ever across any discipline of strength training has been set without engagement in your diaphragm. It can't be done. It is the way to create safety. It's the way to create stability. And it's the X factor, in my opinion, in the difference between being strong and being significantly stronger, or being able to throw a punch and throw a really powerful punch, because it engages these muscles. And like you said, typically they're going to do their job no matter what. It's physiologically part of what the body is doing as it's taking in air and expelling it. But your ability to control that is much different than it happening passively. And these little things like what you just did, that kind of aha moment, I really wish that every single person in the world could have that, because it can change everything about how you train, how you perform, and even
how you feel,
how you feel. I mean, like, man, when you're stressed out, right? And this happens to me, again, I practice stuff all the time, yet I get overloaded with stress, put too many things on my plate, whatever. You feel it happen in your body, that this happens when you stress. You roll forward and you go into this like fetal defense position. If you can calm this down, relax and open up, I mean, that neurologically, it is making a change in your body, right? It's affecting your nervous system and how your nervous system is reacting to the moment. I can't like express how valuable this type of training is to anything you're doing in your life, even if it's not tied to training, but training specifically. I mean, when you're working with people, I would imagine in the moment, right, they have these moments, kind of like I just did, where, I mean, I've done this stuff forever and I had never done that specific exercise. It's kind of an aha moment, right? I can create tension in there, but doing it that specific way. How do you get those types of things to stick with people after a workshop or after a one-on-one session and take home, so that they can keep this kind of thing going?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And just one thing to say on the diaphragm, with it being a muscle, it's part of that core musculature, which
you were saying that when you get that working well for you, you're seeing additional benefits to power output coming from that midline going further out. How many of us train every single muscle within the body, apart from particularly training the diaphragm, like for function, for strength? If we are stronger, it'll function better. If it's stronger endurance, less fatigue, how does that impact also like endurance athletes? Rather than your breathing starting to become dysfunctional later on in your race or competition, maybe there's a fatigue element to your diaphragm and it can't actually maintain the airflow that you're having to do. And then you have to then go to more dysfunctional breathing patterns that are less efficient. And then you then feel worse, but potentially you feel less fit, but potentially there's some discrepancy around actually having not really trained our diaphragm that well. Right. But so without forgetting what the question was. So yeah, effectively what I'm hearing from was a bit of like, how do we get buy-in from people to carry on this thing? Like they might have a little aha moment, exactly. And I'm one of my jobs as a master instructor with the Oxford Advantage is coaching other people to become certified coaches. So there might be a yoga teacher, or there's no prerequisites actually, to be honest, but you tend to get people that are already coaching something, and it's like working like at the Oxford Advantage certification to their like toolbox of coaching. And we were talking about this in the last session we did around getting buy-in from people. And it's what I feel as a coach, like, is our job. Like, if I know everything there is to know about breathing, if I knew even more than I know, but I can't get you to get it, I can't get you to understand it, and most importantly, I can't get you to feel it, then I'm not doing my job as a coach. I'm just like a vessel of information, and that isn't actually then useful to you. So my job as a coach when I'm working with coaches is either to give them that toolbox to be able to give the experience to people. If I'm working with one of my clients or an athlete that we're working with, to get that buy-in from trying to create those aha moments, but then going, okay, can we create some change in how you feel or perform to like back up that aha moment? Because an aha moment comes and goes quite quick.
Right.
Can we do something where we can actually give you a measurable result that's different? For instance, we might take your resting respiratory rate, do some calmer, slower breathing, and then recheck in a respiratory rate and see how that's been changed when you're on sort of like autopilot. There might be some stuff around breath holding for eliciting like an increased sports performance, but giving them something where there's literally then like a number that's like, okay, that's improved. It's like, okay, I can see that. And then the final section is then working together and going, okay, I want to help you be successful with this, which we know the most important thing, this has got nothing to do with breathing, this is for anything, of being consistent with it. So can I make it easy for you to do, and can I integrate it into what you're already doing, rather than me saying, right, so you felt that, if you do that, I want you to do that 30 times a day now, every 15 minutes, or I don't know, whatever BS protocol I make up. Ultimately, the more often you do it, the more you feel connected to it, the more it's going to go through. And I think that one thing I explain to people all the time is like, at the start, if you're going to make a change with your breathing, this habit that's in the background going on 20, 25,000 times a day, potentially, there's so many reps, they're all opportunities. But if you just do nothing about it, there's so many reps going on that it's very easy for just a small bit of dysfunction or small bit of inefficiency. And this is what I imagined to myself when I was questioning after my brain injury. If my breathing's a little bit off, I'm doing that many bleeding reps of them. Like, imagine if I was doing that many squats badly, like how bad my knees were. So that's what got me to buy into it. I was like, we're doing that many, like this is potentially a problem that it would just exasperate. So making people for them to be easy and consistent with it, because we're just weaving it into what they're doing and going, at the start, when you're making changes, yeah, you're going to have to think about your breathing. But we want ourselves, Patrick McKeown, who I learned from with the Oxford Vantage, he set it all up. He would say, we want our breathing to be effortless, but you're not going to get to effortless breathing on day one if you've been like a mouth vertical chest breather for 20 years. Like, you're going to have to actively think about and make some changes. And so you're going to have to put some effort in to do that, but it's with an understanding that gradually, as I do ingrain it in and make it more normal for me, then it becomes less effort and more effortless.
I on this token, I wanted to hear, I know that, so you suffered a brain injury playing rugby, a professional rugby player for Nottingham for over 316 games or something like that, right? Like,
I think you've got the exact number.
Surprised, did some research.
There must have been a few friendlies on top. So over.
So yeah, walk me through that, like, because I know that played into you then finding breathing. Like, here you are, you're in the middle of your career. Walk me through that experience.
Yeah, I mean, paint the picture of, like, you've made me think about it differently, and that was back in 2013, so it's nearly 10 years ago, and a lot's happened since then, changed since then, for me. And in the midst of it, I was scared is probably not strong enough word, and petrified probably doesn't paint the full picture of going back on the field. Because I knew I'd had that many head injuries previously. I knew that I wasn't right, but I wasn't strong enough mentally, courageous enough. I've seen a good quote this week from a book I'm reading about the difference between bravery and courage. And bravery being like almost like the absence of fear, whereas courage is like feeling the fear and choosing to go through it. And I was scared of going back on the field, but not courageous enough to go, look, I'm done. I'm quitting, because I had a bad relationship mentally with quitting things. Like, I'd see quitting as failure and that being bad. And I was lucky enough that I had a consultant in the end after sort of, I was trying to get back to playing for about 3 or 4 months, and they made the decision for us pretty much, which I was very grateful for.
Like, when you say you knew you weren't right, I mean, that's quite the insight to have as an athlete, to feel that your body's not on the field with you, right?
I'll explain what some of the symptoms and stuff then. But just to say that at the time, I'm like in a dark place mentally for a number of different reasons, in terms of a side effect or a symptom of head injuries and brain injuries is like depression and things like that. And then you throw into the mix of, like, you're going, well, the sport you love playing, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. And then you've added in on top of that, it's like, well, that was also your job. So then now what are you going to do? And then you've got your whole like identity crisis of like, oh, I'm a rugby player and now I'm not a rugby player. How do I deal with that? And that was something I'd been wrestling with for years, but couldn't get my head around it. Anyway, it sort of all got made to change. But at the time, you're there going, part of me was a little bit excited about, like, because I wasn't stupid. I was 31 at the time. So I just signed a 2-year contract, but that was probably going to be, you don't go much past low 30s in rugby to be fair. So I'd had a great career, really enjoyed it, and wouldn't change anything. And particularly because looking back now, it's easier to see with hindsight, go, I just would not be here. I would not have explored. I would have not asked the questions about breathing and had to have done anything about my breathing if I'd not had that. At the time, it's difficult to have that insight, because you're like, well, this is horrendous.
Totally.
But yeah, so I'd had my first concussion to be admitted to hospital when I was 16 playing rugby. And, the next day I felt fine. And there was a return to play protocol of, he didn't play for a few weeks. I can't remember what the protocols were, but he didn't play for a few weeks, and then no ongoing, nothing at all. And then, gradually over the course of my 12, 13-year career, I must have had 12 or 13 concussions events, and maybe 4 or 5 where I got admitted to hospital. And what was happening that I didn't realize at the time, it's only looking back as time went on, those ones were getting, it wasn't that the impact was getting worse. If anything, on some of them, the impact was getting less.
Right.
The impact that caused me to have a seizure and a bleed on the brain was literally nothing. It was in training, playing touch. And it was one of my own teammates on the same team as me that just banged into each other. One of the lads said, I was about to start laughing because it was just funny. 2 of you were trying to catch the same ball and you just banged into each other. It just looked funny. He said, but then when you hit the deck, you started fitting on the floor and everyone shit their pants.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So no, but it's all right. Good thing is I can't remember any of it. So I'm glad. That's the good thing about those things. You don't remember anything. And so there were some stages where it was a case of, I remember being, one of the things you do is like, once you've sort of got rid of your headaches and stuff, and maybe a few days later, or a week later, you're like feeling okay. First bit of exercise would be on a static bike. So like take out any impact of running and just be stationary, just turn the legs in the gym and just see if it brings any symptoms. And it's very difficult when you're trying to exercise at a very low level and you've previously had headaches and stuff, and you're cycling in a gym going, have I got a headache or not? I don't know. How does you feel like if I think about having a headache now, I almost feel like I've got a headache. So it's a bit weird like that. And then I remember being a bit like, I don't know, I think I was all right. But I said to the physio after, I was like, I feel really tired. He said, well, I was like, really tired. And he was like, well, don't go home yet. Don't drive home yet. Just sit downstairs in the cafe and just chill out have a drink. And I fell asleep in the cafe for like 2 hours. And I remember, and I think I got back to playing within soon after I did. It wasn't that long before I played again after that. And then these types of things, just like, it was basically taking me longer to recover. And this one, it was like, 3 months later. And I'm like, I went back to hospital within the first couple of weeks, telling them like, I need another scan because
something's off here.
My CT scan showed me I've got some bruising on the brain. I'm like, I don't know what day it is or what anything. I was in a supermarket decided I wanted to have a yogurt and burst out in tears because of the number of different types of yogurts and flavors was too overwhelming a decision making for me to make. Like I was my eyes were sensitive. So I couldn't do anything other than sleep basically. And I was, just not in a good way. And we actually me and my wife, wife took me back to us, and at that time, I didn't actually get rescanned. I just got sent home saying, it's just concussion. And then I was basically like a zombie for about 3 months. And then I'd had an MRI scan, which then showed like the scarring from the bleed that would have been. And that was basically then a no for contact sports. So that sort of put an end to it. And at that point, because I was scared of playing again, because I wasn't going to make the decision, which I'm not annoyed at myself. I've learned from myself of that. I'm not harsh on myself.
I think that's the crux of when you're a dedicated athlete, a high functioning athlete. A lot of your time is spent mentally conditioning yourself to be tough for your sport. Whether I grew up skiing competitively, I did a ton of visualization and working on that all the time. My identity was tied to being a skier for years. And when you try to turn that switch off, it's very difficult, especially when, like you mentioned, you have these sentiments about failure, and maybe you haven't yet made the connection about how much failure can serve as a lesson for the future. You're not past that point yet. So it really feels like quitting. It feels like giving up. And you see this in, mixed martial arts all the time. A fighter is never going to throw in the towel for himself ever. And when you look to the corner, sometimes as a fan or as a spectator, you're begging them for the safety of the person to throw in the towel, move on, let them recover, see if it's in the cards to keep playing. And it's the interview fighters after, and they're messed up. They don't know what's going on, but they weren't in the moment to make that choice. It's very difficult to execute that.
Yeah. I see it now as like quitting is an option, and then it may, like, before, to me, like quitting or throwing in a towel was like a non-negotiable weakness, failure, rather than a potential right decision, a potential great decision based on these things. This is the right thing to do. This is the best thing to do for you and all the people that love you around you. It's hugely reframing on that. There's a bit of a personality trait around like not giving up and loyalty and that sort of type of thing, where my go-to would be stay loyal, don't give up. That's my sort of like natural go-to. So I do try now to like look at things that I'm doing and decisions that I'm making. This is such a good reminder talking about it, going like, okay, are you just sticking in there because that's what your default is, that you think is right, or can you look at this with a wide lens and go, should you carry on doing this thing, or is it time to say no to that? And because there's this new direction to go in, and that's not failure, that's just a good decision.
It's so hard to make.
So yeah, it's
I struggle with this, like definitely in business and personal endeavors, where I'll put too many irons in the fire, and in the moment it feels like the right thing to do, and then I have a very hard time. It kind of like you choosing the yogurt. I'm just staring at the irons in the fire getting hot, and I don't know which one's the hottest, and I don't know which one I should pull. And it's hard to, when you have that, stay focused, set your goal, commit to it, work hard, show it first, leave last. Like when that's everything that you've been digesting for your whole life, and you have to make that choice of like, look, this isn't serving me. It's taking too much of my energy out, and it's not producing anything positive for my life. I got to shut it down. I can say that now talking to you, but in action, it is so difficult to execute that. But I mean, it always like works out in the end. I mean, maybe that tenacity lends itself to your journey on solving your breath, right? Like the attention to detail and how committed you have to be for that.
Yeah, but this is where, when we understand the conversations going different. I'm by no means like a personality expert or anything like that, but just I quite enjoy those personality profiles. Done a few different ones, and understanding ourselves and understanding that any quality that we have can be really positive, but too much could sometimes, like, when am I being analytical? Like, so being analytical can be great. Being too analytical can paralyze you. And it's the same. So being loyal can be great, but being too loyal means that you never stop doing things that are damaging for you, as an example. So it's looking at your qualities and your gifting and your gifts, and going like, okay, understanding when you're being, and my wife will say it's almost like, you're maybe overplaying your dedication in this area, or whatever. Whatever it is, because some of those qualities we think that they're only purely good, and it's like, it's almost like everything in its right dose, right? You can have too much of anything.
So when you left the sport, was there part of you that felt drawn towards like, okay, I'm not a player, but I'm going to be a coach. I'm going to be involved. I'm going to be an analyst. I'm going to help athletes. So was there like a quick turnaround to getting your foot back in that door?
So I was coaching another team, in a like an amateur team, a few leagues below, which I really enjoyed coaching. I've always enjoyed coaching. I like working with people. I like trying to get the best out of someone. I feel like it's almost like a bit of personal therapy. Probably, I've never even thought of it like this before, but I never really felt like I got the best out of myself. There was glimpses of it, but I always felt like, and this was how I'd ask myself these questions as I got older at the end of the season, of like, do you think you can get better? Have you got more? And I never answered that question no. So I always was going to continue. And I remember, and I was said to myself, like, when you honestly answer that question, you go, I don't think I can get any better. Then it was like, well, that's the time to retire.
So I always felt like I never actually really, like glimpses at times, but never, really got the best out of myself. And it's something I really enjoy trying to do with other people through coaching. And so yeah, I was coaching rugby, and I wanted to use some of the. I felt like if everything I'd put, like I put my heart and soul into flipping into rugby, and for good reason and for choice, and for not at all like saying I don't at all regret any of it in terms of like what you'd have sacrificed and all those types of things. But I mean, for example, I remember interestingly, I got married in the June, the start of pre-season, had my head injury, and I remember being married and wanting to be I'd been with my wife. We'd been together for like 10 years before we got married. It was almost like, it was one of those ones where you get married and it's like, everyone's a bit like, well, it's about time.
Right. I mean, that's like us. Like we're engaged now, but it's been, we've been together 5 years. We could get married tomorrow. We could get married in 4 years. And people would say the same. They go, okay, cool, next.
Yeah. But part of me was like, so it's like 10 years part of it was, well, I want to be able to say to my wife, like, I'm putting you first. And when you're playing like a professional sport, there's times when you just don't, because it's like, well, on Saturday you want to go and do this thing. It's like, well, I'm playing rugby, anyway. So there was a bit of that, and then interestingly, I never actually played another game of rugby again whilst we were married. So she did get get that prioritization. But I felt like I'd learned a lot, had a lot to give, and wanted to carry on in sport or give back and use what I felt like if I'd gone. So I did an engineering degree at Loughborough Uni, like a master's in materials engineering. And one of my mates, as soon as he knew that I was out, was like, look, I can get a job for you at my place. Like, no problem. I'll speak to the boss. Like, you'll be straight in. And I was just like, it'd have been like a good start of an engineering career. I was like, I just felt that would just be like a waste of everything I'd sort of been learned through,
right?
What I'd gone through. And so, I didn't want to go down that route. So I actually retrained as a strength and conditioning coach and was doing some rugby coaching, strength and conditioning work.
And breath work, because I'd always like Oxygen Advantage was not quite in your viewfinder yet.
No. It was
this
about
was well before
3 or 4 years before I even asked myself the question, I'd come across some research that was about brain, like the link between brain injuries and gut health, and also brain injury. So the brain gut axis, but then also brain injuries with dysfunctional breathing patterns or disrupted breathing because of the effect the brain stem, the medulla where your respiratory center is in the middle of the brain. When you have that head injury, the brain gets like banged about. It's wiggling about the brain stem, and that shaking effectively sort of,
and that disrupts the breathing pattern.
Yeah, well, it reduces blood flow and oxygen supply to the brain, and can go on for an awful long time if nothing's done about it. And so I was taking, I can't remember where it even came from. I was exploring things partly because it still felt years later. I'm like, in 2016, like I'm what I can in terms of feeling strong to be able to do things that I enjoyed in the gym and everything, but I still felt like I slightly got the handbrake on. There was something just in the background slightly holding me back, and that whole thing of like how many repetitions of breathing you do every day, I was starting to ask myself the question, well, maybe if my something going on in the background is a bit off and you do loads of them, well, maybe this is something to explore. I had like a whiplashing sort of effect of my head injury and some like neck stuff that's gone on for an awful long time. And starting to try and piece some of these puzzles together, and then coming across some stuff that says, well, people that have had a head injury will have had a disruption to their breathing patterns. It was like, okay, well, this is something I need to explore. Yeah.
I was this is funny. I mean, I'm sure you'll relate to this as a coach. But this was a really interesting moment. I was training an athlete of mine, and they came in one day. This is kind of a snapshot of like how I ended up finding you, actually, but also how I ended up finding breathing in general. So 2 years ago, I was training my athlete, and they came in, and we were doing like a single leg contralateral step up, and they were doing the whole set through their nose. And I have always, since kettlebell certifications and training like the RKC system or Strong First, has always been like a in the nose and then a out the mouth, like a snake breath, right? To cause a contraction in the diaphragm, create tension. And then that applied, to all sports that I play, or if you're sparring, you always want to exhale sharply so that you have tension in case you catch a counter shot, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm training them, and I go, why are you breathing through your nose? Let's do a sharp exhale through your mouth as you step up to create tension. And they're like, no, it's better to breathe through your nose. And it was one of those moments as a coach where I was kind of getting high horsed by my athlete. And I was like,
it's your ego then you've got to figure out something's going to happen.
100%. It was an ego thing going on where I'm like, hey, shut up. Come on. I'm the coach. You don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, at the end of the session, they're like, look, I don't understand the science enough to argue with you. And so you need to read the book Deep. And I was like, okay. And so I read
to read the book what?
Deep by
by Nestor,
right?
Yeah.
So I get this book. I cannot put it down. One, fascinated by free diving. It just blew my mind that someone can hold their breath, static apnea, for like 27 minutes straight. I was like, that's not true. Found it online. I was like, holy shit, that is true. And then it was one of those moments where I just felt like I wasn't sitting at the table. I was like, what's going on here? Why don't I know about this? And then from Deep, read Breathe. From Breathe was like, oh my God, I got to start running, not breathing out my mouth. Like, I hate running. I can't imagine making it worse, but I'm going to make it worse. And so I started to do, in the book, it's like when you start, very difficult. You'll create headaches. We can kind of talk about what's going on there, because I'd love to hear your opinion on it. And I started running. I was like, okay, I'm going to let all the ego stuff out the window.
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry about pace. I'm not going to worry about how far I go. I'm just going to try to breathe.
If you're not a runner, you don't have any ego you have nothing. It's like, just run as slow as you want.
Right. So I started like mouth shut, and I would just try. Basically, it was like a trot. It was almost a fast walk. And it was really difficult in the beginning. And when I say the beginning, it took me, if I'm being honest, it took me over a year to really get to a point where I'm like, I can go and run 5 miles through my nose now at like not an aggressive pace, but a pace that's fast enough where I feel like I'm still like training for the other things I do. And then so when that kicked in, I obviously felt the benefits in jiu-jitsu like night and day. It was insane. Not only in my demeanor, I could stay calm longer, but my conditioning was crazy. I could go out and surf, and my whole perception and fear around surfing went away, because I know I can sit down on the ground and hold my breath for 2.5 minutes. So if I'm panicking, I'm going to be able to hold it for long enough to like get beat up by the water or whatever and come back to the top. And so I'm like, there's got to be a community, of people that do this stuff. And so through social media, I found you. I started following your account and all your content. And it just dawned on me, millions of people don't know that their nose is the one that's supposed to be doing the intake. Yet it's in the middle of our fucking face.
I talk about that. You get like prime real estate right in the middle, and this is just the iceberg on the tip on the top, like, and behind the back, like there's a lot of space in your flipping skull dictated for that nasal cavity. And when you go, it's like if someone just breathes strongly in through the mouth now, you just feel all that cold air hit the back of the throat, boom. Like it doesn't feel nice. The other thing, like intuitively, if you say to someone, if you say to someone, when you see someone like panting, like, what do you think? You're like,
they're out of breath, deconditioned, and they look like they're going to fall over.
Oh yeah, like so, or they're stressed.
Right.
It's like, or they're really, something really stressful's happened. and you go, you already know. You know the answers, like intuitively, because it's a protection thing. Like we have it built into us. We're hardwired to identify danger. We're hardwired to live in communities. So I need to know from reading your facial expressions and your body language, like if you're okay or not. And when you look sad, I know you look sad. When you look stressed, I know you look stressed. The biggest thing that tells me when you're stressed and in danger is how your breathing goes to that fast, heavy, loud chest, mouth, fight or flight state.
That's a really
everyone knows it. No one
interesting-
sees someone.
That point about I love when the evolutionary aspects are tied in this, but I've never thought about this until you just said it, but we have evolved to seek community. I mean, social media is probably the most crystal clear example of that, right? We're addicted to creating community with each other. But it is an indicator when it's like a passive indicator, right? Most people aren't looking at another person going, I wonder what they're like. Okay, they look stressed, but you are reading that. And part of those
subconsciously,
100%.
Subconsciously, your brain's got three things: movement. If you don't move, you die. Or the flip side of that, any organisms that don't have a brain don't move. And then protection and prediction. It's trying to protect you, so it's seeking out danger, and the prediction goes in with it. It's trying to make predictions of like whether things are safe or not. Is it's ultimately what it's trying to do. So we're hardwired to look out for and constantly be scanning the environment. And what's interesting is if like a 50-foot pink elephant went past my window now, I would notice it, even though I'm just looking at you on the screen. My peripheral would like pick it, and I'd see it, and I'd immediately start telling a story in my head as to what that is,
right?
To try and make sense of it.
Yeah.
Right. And you'd come up with something. Oh, it's a hot air balloon, and it hasn't got, I don't know. It's trying to tell a story to work it out and try to like find out whether this was safe or not.
Yeah.
The brain.
I got a question on the. So when I started doing this, from time to time, one nostril will get more closed than the other. I think that just probably happens naturally. It'll switch sometimes.
The
they're both clear.
Yeah. Every 90 minutes, apparently, there's a cycle that the nose goes through.
Okay, that makes sense. And I would be running, and in the beginning, so at the beginning of that year, when I started running, just with nasal breathing, I would get this pain in my head, like up on the upper opposite side of. So if my right nostril is more clogged, then the right side of my brain opposite the breathing one.
Yeah,
it would be so excruciating. It would start to blink my eye, and tears would like come out of the eye. But I was so committed to trying to learn how to run this way so I would just slow my pace down.
Yeah.
And it went away after, I think around the 6-month mark of running this way. It almost was like I developed a second wind within the capacity of running. Do you know what could be happening that creates that pain? Because I've heard it from clients too, that's like the discouraging point that they get to, is they start to feel that headache pain and they can't break through that to the other side.
Yeah. I mean, I can say that I don't know for sure, like that's for sure, but we can. So there is some understanding, awareness of the as I said, the nostrils, the brain will flip every, whether it's exactly 90 minutes, but every on a cycle, roughly 90 minutes apparently. But something that we have noticed with a lot of the breath holding techniques in the Oxford Advantage is that, like if I breathe in now strongly through my nose and I test one compared to the other, that they both feel the same, like they both feel clear. Because when we work on our breath holding and really get to trap the nitric oxide that the bacteria in our nose create and utilize that and re-breathe it in, like it has this vasodilating effect on those who open up your airways. And so one of the really important tools, and it's multifaceted breath holding, we can maybe talk about that separately, but there is a clearing of the airways in the nose that the nitric oxide provides when you do strong breath holding. So long as you trap it in and you breathe in at the end of your breath hold. And
That's really important when you first start out. I mean, I couldn't run 50 meters to the end of my road without just snot pouring down my face into my mouth.
Right.
It was disgusting when I first tried nasal running.
Same.
And so doing some of the breath holding protocols is very useful for helping to clear the nose, let alone
you physically, you're saying that because I've done breath holds before, but I don't hold my nose. That actually is an important aspect. You're saying because it traps the nitric oxide in
stops
your
the nitric
cavity.
oxide from leaving. Yeah.
So when you breath hold, close your mouth, obviously, but physically hold your nose shut.
Let's do one now. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
And we're gonna nod the head to simulate some movement. So we do all the breath holds after an exhale. So actually, before we'll just do this together, for everyone listening can follow us on. Take a strong inhale through your nose to notice how blocked or clear it feels, and then test one compared to the other. Yeah. And then we're gonna we'll just do one to see. I mean, typically you need to do more, but you can get an effect after just one. You're going to do normal breath in, normal breath out, pinch the nose. We're going to nod the head, and I want it to be not like horrendously challenging, but like maybe go for like 20 head nods or something. Build up some air hunger, bit bigger. So in, out, pinch the nose. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Let go and breathe in through the nose. And you can feel, you should know if you breathe in strongly, it's like, I can feel the airflow more. The air feels cooler. And then there's one feel clearer than the other. Like,
what just happened?
Yeah. So like typically say like do 3 or 5 strong ones of those. Don't do strong breath holding if you're pregnant or got any serious underlying health conditions, but doing some breath holds, we do them walking and jogging and in other movements and things as well. But just literally nodding your head, you can and pinching the nitric oxide that's created by the bacteria in your nose has a vasodilating effect, meaning it helps open up those airways and blood vessels dilate, and it feels clearer. So, but in terms of those nostrils, like the left one activating the right hemisphere of the brain and the right one. So there's that contralateral, as you mentioned before about this, the contralateral effect makes sense, potentially. The fact that when you slowed your pace down, it eventually it would after a few minutes where it then and went to an easier pace, an airflow that you could manage through the nose more comfortably,
right,
had it went away. And then over time, as you improve the efficiency of your breathing and your nasal breathing and all that goes into that in terms of how you get air in, how that oxygen is getting into better parts of the lungs, if you're doing nice diaphragmatic breathing as well, how the oxygen is getting from your lungs more efficiently into your blood, and then really importantly, from your blood into your tissues, because you're slowing your breathing down with the added resistance. The nose provides about 50% more resistance than the mouth, that you are then noticing that you don't have any of those headaches anymore. So what it would suggest to me is that when you were struggling to manage one nostril's a little bit blocked, because we haven't been doing any other, like we haven't got that used to having both of them clear, and we haven't been using some of the breath holding protocols potentially, but one's feeling blocked, basically using one nostril, and managing the airflow through one nostril is going to be tough. And already you're early in your transition to nasal running, and you're yet to feel the benefits because you're getting from being maladapted and used to mouth breathing, and the nose is blocked and not used to working. It's same as like if you do loads of pull-ups and get good at pull-ups, and then just stop doing pull-ups for a couple of months, go back to doing pull-ups again, they're flipping hard.
Right. Yeah.
It's no different. It's just if you use your nose more, it gets better at doing its job. So being maladapted and then it making you drive through one nostril, and you're going at a faster pace than's comfortable, you're basically creating a stressful event. You're struggling to manage the airflow through the nose. Why it creates the headache, like I don't.
Well, there could be. I mean, this is again not my area of expertise, but thinking out loud, one thing that dawned on me when I was reading these books is that, and I had never considered this, that the nose is a muscle, right? It has tissue. It functions the same way like there can be hypertrophy within your nose, within your nasal cavity. So maybe through this uncomfortable process, there's some level of inflammation that's created. And then due to what you were saying, like the effort level can exacerbate the inflammation. And then when I decrease the effort level, it starts to come back down. And to your last point, the repetition of it creates the conditioning aspect. And then that conditions, again, might be a long shot, but conditions the tissue to adapt to the stress protocol.
Yeah. No, for sure.
So
I think that, there's definitely, because I can relate to making nasal breathing, like reading, say, like after I read the book, The Oxygen Advantage, a bit like you said with Nestor's book, I'm like, right, I've got to start using my nose. Like I run to the end of the road and it's horrendous. And normally when it's horrendous, my ego would go, well, like if you're crap at that, then it must be rubbish. But what I couldn't get away from, I was like, I've understood the science of it. I get that my nose is designed for breathing. I can't just rubbish this and go, oh no, my nose is different to everyone else's. I've got this special nose that isn't for breathing. And you go, well, if your nose isn't for breathing, what the hell is it for? And people go, smelling. And you go, really? I know it is for smelling, but do you think it would need to be that big and in that prime real estate in the middle of the face? So I was like, okay, this is something I therefore actually need. For once, my ego got out of the way and was like, right, we're on board. Let's sort this out. But I was very much like nasal only until I die type of scenario. And I'd be running, but I'd be running up a hill. And well, then my ego would get in the way and I wouldn't slow down because I didn't. And then I'd be running up a hill going, and like literally like, did I have, I don't know if I necessarily had headaches, but I certainly felt horrendous. And yeah, probably some headache type of stuff. And I put it down to like literally making the event so stressful. It wouldn't be like hypoxia. If we measured your blood or had to do pulse oximetry on something, it wouldn't be that you're, dropping. You wouldn't even be out of normoxia, like out of like, but you wouldn't be below 95%. No way.
Right.
So it's not like a physiological thing of like, oh, you weren't getting enough oxygen to your brain.
Right.
That's why you're getting headaches. It's definitely not that. It would be, for me, there's a huge element of it, like it, because the stressful feeling of basically feeling like you're suffocating is what it sort of felt like to me. Like I
would agree.
Frightening. It's frightening there because we're all, well, I'm scared of dying, but, or just, it's not a nice feeling, is it? And so, I think that messes with the head a bit.
You're pushing yourself, and so this would happen on the stretch, like coming into my house. It's like the last quarter mile that I would do and it really didn't matter. Like if I was pushing it, it's that last quarter mile, I would get that and I'm like, it's like my whole body's kind of moving in and out of it. And in my head, I'm like, you're so dumb. Just open your mouth. Like, all you have to do is stop doing this stupid thing that you're doing that, no one's watching you. Just breathe out your mouth. And I'd be like, so committed, like, no, I got to get home. And I'm kind of glad I did, because I felt like that was like my threshold moment. It was that working through that last quarter mile every time pushed up the ceiling of the, I'd call it a pain threshold because it was uncomfortable, but then it allowed that mid-range to be,
you're forcing adaptation effectively.
Yeah.
I mean, the same way breath holding is a stressor on the body. We have a low oxygen and high CO2. So we have this hypoxia, hypercapnia. They're just fancy words for low oxygen, high CO2, where you're forcing the body to adapt. You're going like, deal with less oxygen and deal with more CO2. Like, and what does the body the body is amazing at adapting. It will go, yes, sweet. No, well, it doesn't go, yes, sweet. It doesn't like it. But part of that adaptation is going like, I don't like this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get really much better at this so that you can't do this to me again, type of scenario. And then we go, I'm going to do a stronger breath hold tomorrow.
I would notice this. So before starting to work on breathing in athletic situations, when I would be surfing and I'd fall and get sucked down to the bottom, you would feel that desire. What I thought prior to reading was a desire to get more oxygen.
Yeah.
When really you're feeling the buildup of carbon dioxide in your bloodstream, which is really uncomfortable. And when I started doing just static breath holds in the morning and pushing this out, I started to notice in the water, similar to understanding where your diaphragm is, I could start to feel that feeling of what it felt like to have CO2 begin to build up. And in that moment, have the awareness to go, I'm fine, because this isn't, my body's not about to shut down from oxygen. I'm just uncomfortable with this. And it allowed me to get over that, and then became much more comfortable in those extreme settings, which pushed me to try strength training, which totally flipped my mind upside down on what's possible within the gym.
There's a bit there that's really interesting on like your understanding of the physiology of breathing then changed your psychological relationship with breathing. And it's massive, like psychology, like the psychological aspect of breathing is massive. Your brain, the respiratory center, your brainstem, the medulla is monitoring primarily, not only, but primarily that carbon dioxide, as you said, because it has such, carbon dioxide gets carried in the blood as carbonic acid. It creates a more acidic environment, and your brain wants to keep your pH very stable around like 7.342 or something, but like 7.3. And so it's highly sensitive to that. And understanding, it's got two options. It's got the how fast you're breathing, so your respiratory rate. It can try and speed your breathing up to get rid of more CO2 if it's noticing it build up, and or the size of each breath. So you can take a bigger breath. And that element is almost like, obviously we're breathing oxygen in, and that's a super important thing, as I said at the beginning, about it's life. Like if you're not got oxygen, you're gonna die. But there is this huge part of it that's the modulation of the CO2 levels within our body. And just as the nose gets maladapted, when we get into bad habits of poor breathing, become inefficient with our breathing, we'll either be taking bigger breaths than we need, or faster breathing rate than we need, or both. And that then gets us into a cycle of inefficiency, which creates creates a condition in the body where we've got less CO2 at a standard level, and the brain adapts to that. The brain is just adapting to what we do. It's not like negative or positive adaptation. It's just adapting to the situation that we place upon it.
There was one thing I've always been curious about, and I know that you've done some workshops with mixed martial artists and MMA fighters and grapplers and stuff. On one side of it, from like a technique standpoint, and if you watch boxing, and we'll talk about some of the exceptions in MMA that we've seen recently, which I think are really cool. But in boxing, historically, you're going to see a sh or a sh, right? This vocal exhale out of the mouth that contracts the muscles around the diaphragm in the event that, like I was saying, someone extends to punch and they get countered. If you get countered when you're not tight, you're going to get dropped. So it's a defense mechanism, and you'll see it in, probably universally every boxing gym in the world. With nasal breathing, and maybe I'm just not good at it, you can't produce that same maybe like volume of exhale at that sharp interval that you see in boxing. So when you're working with MMA fighters, how do you integrate nasal breathing? In what areas do you integrate it? And then what are some of the limitations, given that now we're talking about like peak performance within a sport, which I think always has to be kind of held to a little bit different of a standard, because there are performance advantages across everything. I know I just asked you 3 questions there. I'm trying to get better at doing that. But
no, it's good, because and also even better, I just want to mention something. I just want to mention something about running before we move any further.
Yes, please.
In the I've took to running as just it's almost like I'm not trying to get better at running. I'm using running to just heighten my awareness and train my breathing. At rest, if we say to someone or look at someone breathing, you go, I don't know, they look like they're breathing right, the mouth is shut and I can't really see too much chest movement, whatever. But then what are they like when they're exercising? What are they like when there's actually a greater demand for oxygen and more CO2 created? Then we see the dysfunction. So for me, the dysfunctional breathing goes under the radar at rest for most people, unless you're like, far down the line of dysfunctional breathing, it's going to go under the radar. And so actually going out running is a way for you to connect to actually
increase the demand on your breathing, notice like how is it, what does it want to do when you're on autopilot, and then like noticing that, okay, so it's louder and it's bigger when I'm exercising. You get to find out, and is it uncomfortable to keep your mouth closed or not? Can you use your diaphragm still? And literally every time I go out for a run now, I am learning something about the way my body is breathing or how I'm breathing. And
I love that.
just it's cool. And like, yes, it's hard at the start when you switch to nasal breathing if you're not used to it. Now, I've had a professional triathlete that she switched to nasal breathing. So let's say switched to nasal breathing. First week, she was like, amazing, loved it. I was running 4-minute Ks, and I was like, holy moly. I was like, well, you clearly are not mal. There's been you were probably nasal breathing, you just didn't even realize it before.
Right.
But for most of us, it typically say sort of 6 to 12 weeks to adapt. But as you said, like for you, like, a year to actually feel good. But when you get to that point where you've actually left your ego at the door, slowed your breathing down, and actually allowed yourself to work on improving the efficiency of it, I just got to the point where, I got buy-in on myself in 6 weeks. I went from a 20-minute 15K, 5K, which is like not any world records, but people will be like, oh, you're not even sub 20, but it's a reasonable pace for a 5K.
Right.
I dropped a minute off. I was like 19-17 or something after 6 weeks. And I wasn't even doing it right. I was like, oh, I was just trying to do a bit of nasal here, there, and whatever. And I was like, holy, and one of the bits I'd learned, and we can talk about this with the MMA stuff, is like, one of the bits that I did utilize was I didn't stay solely nasal, but I understood the principle of efficient airflow and efficient, how efficiently I can get oxygen into my lungs, and how I manage that airflow. And I knocked a minute off, and I was doing 1 run a week. That's it.
Yeah, that was what I
strength training. And I was like, okay, I've knocked a minute off. That's mad. This is a thing. And I was like, I'm not even doing it right. I'm like, let's plug in. And then so once I then really worked on the efficiency side of it, I was just like I used to not really even like running 5K. And then it's like after a while, 10K feels like easy now.
Right.
I'm at the point where like 20K feels easy. Like a half marathon feels easy now. It's not a particularly fast pace, but it's at this efficiency where you're like, feel like I could just carry on forever. That then gets tested when you sign up to a marathon or an ultra marathon. That's ended up what I'm doing. But it's it's fun in a way. So I just wanted to say that, like, if when you do invest in that efficiency, you get to the point where it's just like you've got 2 options. It's like, I can just carry on running at this nice steady pace and feel like I can run forever. And actually recovery afterwards is like really simple, because I haven't just smashed the system. I've kept the system in a nice aerobic state of being efficient. There's less to recover from. It feels nice. I enjoy my running. So now I go out on more runs. Or someone goes, right, well, that feels it. I'll run at a faster pace. And, then the choice is sort of yours. But there's how many people out there, you said about millions of people benefiting from like understanding how to breathe with the nose, or they should breathe with the nose. How many people, exercise is beneficial for everybody. The running is probably the most accessible thing. It's like, put some trainers on, or even don't put trainers on and run barefoot on some grass. Like, go outside and just go and do it. The barriers to entry are minimal, as long as people aren't injured or bad knees and that sort of thing. But the barriers to entry are very small. How many people don't go running because it's just a miserable experience? And would it be less miserable, or dare I say, an enjoyable experience, if they were breathing efficiently?
Well, I can speak to that directly. I don't like to run. And as a former skier, it's not kind on my body. If I go and run, it's on pavement and my knees and shins get blown up. They do. But to your point, running for me is not the goal. Running is an opportunity that highlights my breathing patterns and the variance in their range. And then and actually, maybe I'm kind of answering this question by listening to you talk about running, oddly enough, is that I have a spectrum of availability now. So if you have to do a dynamic explosive movement, or like shoot a double leg or tackle someone or change position or roll them over or throw a couple punch combination, maybe that's a moment where you just let your body be athletic and dynamic and do what it has to do. Following that period of effort, go back to nasal breathing quickly, regain that homeostasis, and then you can use it tactically throughout whatever it is that you're doing. But if you don't start with and I say the year thing, I don't want to discourage people, choose any starting point and go for as long as you want. But by doing that, it established a baseline understanding. And so, I mean, kind of back to that question. So when you're working with these athletes, are you teaching them about like the values and the principles, and then, hey, do it here, don't do it there? Or what does that conversation look like?
So I split it down into 3 areas: foundations, performance, and recovery. So understanding that my base level foundation is going to dictate my performance. If you are a poor, inefficient breather at rest, you don't start to get better at breathing when you start training or you go into the octagon and you go into the ring. Like, it actually just exposes you and you're going to get worse. And then how you're breathing will affect how fast you recover, like in sessions, as well as like post-session down regulation. And that's probably one that most people sort of come across. Like, we can create more parasympathetic activity and down regulate by controlling our breathing and the exhales and all that stuff. What I find, so going big on the, like, how you're breathing 24 hours a day is what your brain is listening to. Is those chemoreceptors don't just turn on when we're exercising, they're there on when you're sleeping. So, we talk about mouth taping at night to make sure your nasal breathing can be an absolute game changer for some people. I don't want to scare too many people. I don't normally start with that. We've eased our way into it. Because when I first came across that, I was like, I'm not taping my mouth. No way. And then, after a while, it was like, okay, I'll tape my mouth. And then now it's like, I will, 4 years in probably of mouth taping, I'll still tape it every night. I've started to introduce a bit of Vicks vapor. From my dad recommended this bit of Vicks vapor on your snout, as well as the mouth tape is absolutely dreamy. Anyway, so getting your nose comfortable at base level, work on your foundations is like a non-negotiable. And then understanding the benefits of nasal breathing, but understanding like how our system breathes, how our system wants to breathe, how we've got these 3 different phases, or not different, but these 3 phases of getting oxygen into the lungs, 1, from the lungs into the blood, 2, and then from the blood into the tissues, 3. Understanding that process, understanding how we use the breath, allows us then to use all of it to our advantage. We can breathe through your mouth. So understanding how that can be a bit like the being analytical can be good, but being too analytical can be bad. So it's just, we can use the mouth effectively, or we can use the mouth ineffectively. Your nose is, that we've talked about that design for breathing, but if there's a point where you can't manage the airflow through your nose, there might be a reason why, very specifically, we breathe out of the mouth in a certain way to help you manage your carbon dioxide levels that we talked about as the driver of our breathing. And understanding, though, that there's a difference between training my breathing to make it adapt and get better, where I've got to add a load to it, I've got to add a challenge to it, compared to right now I'm in the ring and I'm competing, how there might be some subtle changes that I use to govern my airflow, to help me to govern my breathing, to allow me to manage my airflow. And particularly for that minute rest in between rounds, like if you spend all that time breathing crap because you haven't got any tools to manage your breathing, or if you just stay nasal because you like spend a minute being like stressed trying to stay nasal breathing. Well, what about if we understand that the CO2 is what's driving that? You've obviously got too much that your system can handle. Get rid of some. A couple of mouth breaths, strong CO2 dumps in a short period of time to allow you to regain your breathing a bit. Okay, so carbon dioxide is the catalyst that allows oxygen to be released, but too much of it's driving your breathing into a pattern is inefficient. Too many breaths, too fast, too shallow, not getting oxygen into the lower portion of the lungs. So can I offload some of that additional CO2 that's causing me to lose control of my breathing, so that I can then have 55 great seconds of better breathing and go back in a better state? And I've just used 5 seconds before just to dump off a bit. but understanding that if I always dump CO2 when it gets tough in training, I'm not allowing my body to adapt to that stimulus.
So you would instruct, this dumping idea is really fascinating to me, because I can think about, so if we're doing like a shoot boxing round, right? And it's 3-minute rounds with a 1.5-minute rest in between. And there's some instances where in that first round, like, you have to do some wrestling that you weren't planning on, and all of a sudden my heart rate's through the roof. And then there's, you're scared. Well, I'm not going to speak for other people. I'm scared, right? Because now I'm tired. My heart rate's
I'm scared thinking about it.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to get hit. So then my adrenaline's spiking. I get to that rest period. I'm trying to go in and out. You're saying it's actually be more advantageous to get a couple deep, long, aggressive exhales to offload carbon dioxide in an attempt to reset or like recalibrate that system, then go to the nasal breathing?
Yeah, potentially. So there's like, nothing's black and white in that this is where we go. There has to be an education piece of us understanding like what's going on. Carbon dioxide is the catalyst that allows oxygen to be released from your hemoglobin, from your red blood. So if you were constantly, like strong exhales every time, because that allows me to get my power. If you're doing that constantly, you're offloading CO2 constantly. What happens is the oxygen that's bound to hemoglobin in your red blood cells stays more strongly attached. So it's going to be in your blood, but it's not being released into tissues. And then you're going to struggle potentially to, when things ramp up, to actually feel like you can catch your breath. So, but at the same time, CO2 is that driving force that of your breathing that your brain is monitoring primarily. And so if it's driving you to breathe and you can't catch your breath, those really fast and shallow breaths are very inefficient, because the shallowness means that oxygen isn't getting to the lower portions of the lungs where you have the greatest density of alveoli and most of the blood because of gravity. And then the other thing is the sheer number of breaths you're taking is inefficient, because every breath you take, there's about 150 milliliters, depending on the size of the person, that 150 milliliters that can't be occupied, called dead space. So if you're doing loads of breaths, you're wasting air in dead space. If they're shallow as well, which they're going to be if you're doing loads of them, then you're not getting oxygen to where it needs to get to within the lungs to go into the blood. So then there's this like play of, I'm probably feeling like I'm going to dump on some CO2 anyway, but I'm being really inefficient with my breathing. How's that also affecting our nervous system and stress response, and therefore like cognitive function?
Right.
Exactly. Like when I'm ending up being a bit super sympathetic dominant, my cognition and my thought process, my rational brain is a bit switched off. So it's affecting my decision making. Can I dump off some of that CO2 to then get back into better breathing patterns? But just understanding that if I'm always dumping off CO2, I'm actually going to become more sensitive to it. So it's like in training, there's some benefits in training to practice these tools so you know how to use them.
Totally.
But the vast majority of our training, you want to make we'll do stuff where we're like, right, your recovery is going to start breathing through one nostril, because that's harder. And the resistance means your diaphragm's got to work harder. So we're building strength of your diaphragm, and managing your airflow is miserable. But then when you're in a fight, allowing yourself to breathe the two, or letting yourself do a couple of CO2 dumps with your mouth, like it feels so easy. Yeah. And then you get guys like Asana.
This is who I was going to talk about.
Exactly.
Right?
Like whole fight nasal, like and never, because in something intuitively that people know, and I mean he works with a fantastic breathwork guy in New Zealand, but people intuitively know anyway in fighting, if they see the opposition, and we knew it in rugby, any contact sport, if you see your opposition panting from the mouth, you know it's game time, right? Let's go. Done. Give him the ball, I'll smash him, or you're going to knock him out. Like, this is over now. I know that. And you know it yourself. When you start panting like that, you start bricking yourself because you're like, I'm toast. So we know this already. And so by staying away from that, you are governing yourself to be able to perform at your peak. And someone that's done a lot of work like him is staying nasal the whole way through because he has like trained that efficiency and had obviously had that adaptation gone on. There'll have been a lot of work gone into that. Make no bones about it. But someone that isn't there yet can use these tools. So they may have done a few mouth breaths in and around when they needed to, but it's kept them in more of that calmer state. To make the point around like working at that absolute max intensity, like he will have been. There's a paper done by Olympic triathlon coach George Dallam in 2018. I can't remember how many riders it was, but they had them doing VO2 max test, nasal breathing and mouth breathing. The same people compared their when they were measuring mouth breathing. Now they were adapted to nasal breathing. He was a big fan of nasal breathing. He wanted to like sort of prove what was going on. And so some of them had been nasal breathing for like 3 years, or at least 6 months, I think it was in the cutoff. So they were well used to it. At their VO2 max, they had no drop off in that maximum oxygen consumption, no drop off in their power output, but their respiratory rate was 22% less. And I think they had 20 or 25% more CO2, their end tidal CO2. So more CO2 at the end of their exhalation, showing that not they were blowing off more CO2, showing that there was CO2 in them that was more CO2 was staying in the system.
Which is good.
It's good. It's helping with that efficiency. Yeah. And then the efficiency is proven by the 22% reduction in their respiratory rate. So breathing less. Breathing is a movement pattern. Breathing has an energy cost to it. Breathing less means you're, one, more efficient, but two, saving energy on that base level thing you got to do anyway. So more energy for fighting, striking, running, cycling, whatever it is that you're doing. And a lot of people, when you first come across it, particularly I was the same, and I'm sure you'll have been, if someone had said to you like a few years ago when you were just starting out with your nasal breathing, going, yeah, there's people that build up to and actually a better nasal breathing and a VO2 max test than mouth breathing. You'd be like, hell no, absolutely no way. You just can't imagine it. But you stick at it and you see it.
It's crazy. I've done 2 separate times of VO2. We used to do like active and resting metabolic assessments for clients at a previous place that I worked, and doing that, thinking now about doing that nasally seems insane, even knowing everything that we've talked about over the podcast and the reading and everything like that. But I'm kind of fast, like it would be really interesting to try that. And the thing about the respiratory rate is fascinating, so that they're actually breathing less total times, keeping a higher percentage of CO2 within their bloodstream, and they're producing the same active metabolic rate as someone else who's breathing through the nose. And that's
someone's breathing through the mouth, yeah,
right, or through the mouth. The implications of that for endurance sports is monumentous.
It's mad. It's mad.
Yeah, I was fascinated watching. Izzy's always a calm fighter. He has just a calm demeanor, but watching how many rounds he went not breathing through, with the exception of a couple strikes here and there. But really, I mean, you always know when you go into a training hall and you look on the mat, the dude that doesn't breathe through his mouth or the girl that doesn't breathe through her mouth, you already know instantly that they're not to be messed with. Like they're a level above, and they don't, you can hear your opponents when you're grappling, you hear their respiration.
Yeah.
And maybe I pay attention to this more because I find it fascinating, but you can feel the chest and the shoulders contract up and down, and you hear their breathing. And it is exactly what you said. It is a tell that they are losing energy and that they're getting like weaker. You see it on the pitch, right? You see someone else. It's that killer instinct that you.
Yeah. It's, and that hardwired thing we were talking about, you think of like, if you watch someone sleeping and if they're breathing silently and quietly and softly, you're like, they look safe.
Right. They're resting.
They feel safe. They look calm. They look like that's a nice restful sleep. Someone that's snoring quite loud or breathing quite heavy, there's a lot of movement, a lot of noise. The noise is created by the speed and the turbulence that air's coming through, and it doesn't look peaceful. It doesn't look restful. It looks almost stressful. And you'd like, if someone was breathing like super quite heavy, you might even go over and check that they were all right, regardless of whether you knew anything about breathing, just because intuitively we know these things about, looking out for danger and safety of our community. We're not designed to we can't really live in isolation. We would soon die out.
Well, that's I mean, I promised it, monitor the time here. I did a poor job of
Well,
that.
I talked for about 10 hours. We could stay all day talking about
I
this.
literally, I mean, we could talk for a week straight on this stuff. I find it fascinating, which means we'll 100% have to do this again. I feel like there's so many elements that we didn't really even get to, the sleeping being one of them. I would love to chat about that again in the future.
For sure.
But yeah, David, please tell everyone, this will be in the show notes too, but where they can find you, how they can connect with you, some of the courses you're teaching, everything like that. Go for it.
Yeah, so my probably like most active on Instagram, where most people I'd say that's Jacko Human Flag. Website is rootedlife.co.uk. There's the Oxygen Advantage, where there's the certification I'm doing. The next one I'm doing there is if people are interested in becoming a coach themselves, add that to their coaching toolbox. I'm doing an online one that's 9 weeks long, starting on the 6th of July. So you can get involved in that. There's a few online courses that are going. Depending on when this comes out, there's an app that we're working on, which is going to be on a new platform, which will be probreathwork.com, which I'm quite excited to launch in the next. It was supposed to be this week, but it's obviously not going to be now.
You'll have to get it to me, because this will go live on Tuesday.
Oh, sweet.
But you send me all the information. I'd love to share it with listeners and stuff like that. I use it myself.
Yeah. I've got a free ebook that's got like
okay,
three steps to better breathing. I'll send you the link to that. It's a great one there's an ebook. It's not super long and complicated, but then there's some private videos within there to give people the 3 basic principles that I think is beneficial for everyone to just get started and improve the way that they feel, move, and perform is sort of what I say, because changing your breathing will do that.
Indeed it will. Well, thank you very much, brother. I appreciate it, and we'll do this again in the future.
Yeah, awesome, brother.